Great. Welcome everybody to the next installment of the Measured Webinar series. Today we are discussing the very hot topic of Performance Max, Google's newest multi-channel black box easy button opportunity to spend money with Google. We have a lot to cover today, so let's jump right in and we will meet our speakers. Just wanted to highlight that this is an interactive webinar. There will be some poll questions today. You can use another device or another window to go to slido.com, and then you can enter this code and you'll be able to participate in our polls. You will see that code pop up again if you did not get to it just yet. All right, and today's webinar is Can You Beat the PMax Algorithm? We're going to cover the evolution of Performance Max, a quick recap for those who may not be familiar. We will be discussing the allocation and spend trends from across the measured portfolio of brands. We will then surface some results from our PMax testing and incrementality model. And then we will highlight some key takeaways for you as you go on strategizing around this new channel. All right. What we think you'll find today is that PMax is a very unique and nuanced channel. So we felt it was important to have true e-commerce and measurement experts in on this session. We are very honored to have measured client and SVP of e-commerce at RealTruck, Luke Coltrin, here today. Welcome, Luke. Thanks for being here. And we also are pleased to have measured webinar veteran, analytics guru, and VP of Decision Science, Jim Greco, here as well. Hey, Jim.
Good morning, Clay, and thank you to everyone for joining. This is a very large crowd, and we're happy you made time for us today.
Thanks, Jim. And my name is Clay Cohen, and I will be moderating, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Measured. All right. A little bit about RealTruck before we get started. The RealTruck online store was born in a basement in 1998 and is the premier vertically integrated truck, Jeep, and off-road parts accessory company in North America with a portfolio of over 28 brands that all rank 1 or 2 in each of their primary categories. Most importantly, the company prides itself on its omni-channel presence and deep learning culture, constantly testing and measuring to find new opportunities to grow. Luke, do you want to give us a little bit of background on RealTruck and your experience with Measured?
Yeah, we're constantly trying to understand, how best we can, better reach and optimize our potential shoppers, our truck and off-roading and accessorizing enthusiasts. And, like every advertiser out there, you're always wondering, what is my media truly doing, right? What impact is my investment really having on the business? And I think that's, frankly, a little over a year ago, the question that we were asking ourselves and evaluating different solutions, different ways to go about answering that question, ultimately landed on Measured and the ability to come in and do incrementality testing across all of those channels that you just mentioned, Clay, and really start to build a foundation of our of understanding of what was really driving incremental shopping behavior for our business. And that's kind of where we're at today. We've been a client of Measured for over a year. We were doing our first incrementality tests about a year ago, and we've done a lot since then and learned a lot about how best to optimize our business.
Great. Thanks, Luke, for that background. And for those on the call who may not be familiar with Measured, just a really quick overview. We are a comprehensive end-to-end media optimization platform, purpose-built for e-commerce brands. This is powered by the world's largest library of incremental lift tests. Today, we'll specifically be talking about data from those tests, as well as how those feed into our incrementality model, providing data in our cross-channel attribution dashboard that our brands use to measure incrementality across all of their media channels. All right, let's jump right into a quick reminder, interactive webinar. We have a poll question coming up. So if you go to slido.com, either on your phone or in another tab, and enter this code, you will be able to participate. Our first poll question approximately what percentage of your Google spend goes to PMax? So not Google overall of your whole portfolio, but PMax out of the Google share of wallet for your brand. And we can see the results coming in here. We'll just give it a few more seconds as this populates. So it looks like PMax is generally within the 1 to 25% range share of wallet for Google spend. Very interesting. And we will actually see how this compares to the measured portfolio shortly. Thank you for the 69, 70 folks who have participated in the poll. All right. So let's jump right in. A quick recap on PMax and what it is. Jim, do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So most of you had just indicated you are spending some of your media budget in this new campaign type that Google has had out now for 12 to 18 months. But for those of you that may not have, just a quick primer, Performance Max is essentially a single campaign type that will serve media across all of Google's available inventory. It covers YouTube, display, search. You can see all the visuals here on the slide. When you run a Performance Max campaigns, it is Google's algorithms that decide where the ad gets placed. There are configuration settings that you can apply to help tweak some of the delivery. We'll talk about a little bit of that later. And similar to its predecessor, which was Smart Shopping, it is essentially now not only harvesting inbound clicks on search queries in terms of search and shopping, but the advertiser can also upload audiences to view-based media, such as YouTube or the Google Display Network, to actually reach those. Now, Performance Max is now the primary campaign type of this algorithmic type offering. Smart Shopping has been sunset, and all advertisers using Smart Shopping were essentially transitioned as Smart Shopping was sunset in August of last year. So that's where we are today.
Thanks, Jim. And this is interesting because while PMax was part of the evolution of Smart Shopping, it actually invested across more channels. So that's going to come into play a little bit later when we start looking at the data and how brands are funding this PMax channel. Thank you. So for clients of Measured, we did a webinar specifically for them about 7 months ago, as PMax was brand new, and kind of recommended some approaches for how to test into this new channel. Jim, do you want to talk a little bit about just recapping what we covered there and what our recommendations were?
Yes. Last summer, while that transition from Smart Shopping to Performance Max was in progress, we did a webinar and we looked at what our experience was at Smart Shopping with the thought that this probably will provide some good ingoing guidance for how advertisers should start to think about Performance Max, because it's simply an evolution of what Smart Shopping was. For our clients, as Clay mentioned earlier, we do a lot of geo-incrementality lift testing. We model that and provide incrementality estimates for brands who have not yet done geo-testing with us. And what we had seen in our Smart Shopping test was a fairly wide range of results of how incremental AdWords is at counting media and what percentage of those are truly incremental to the advertiser. That led us to believe that PMax was probably going to behave very similarly. And as a result, we recommended to all of our clients at the time that you probably should test this because there's going to be levers, there's more inventory where it can be placed, and that can have what we felt at the time was going to be a wide range of potential variability on how it would perform.
Thanks, Jim. So Luke, you at RealTruck really took this approach to heart. Can you tell us a little bit about that approach and your testing experience over the last year leaning into PMax?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, we can even start a little bit prior to that. We were a beta tester of Performance Max through our kind of Google rep, and having the opportunity to test that. And just in those kind of early days, and saw some good results, right? Saw, comparing to either Smart Shopping or other search channels that we were driving and investing in. But again, the question remained, right, of what ultimately is this driving for the business, whether it's established channels and behaviors that you have, or if it's new channels that are a little bit more unknown. PMax was one of our probably first tests with measured. We were pretty early on, I think, in that testing approach. And what that allowed us to do is at least just get a baseline understanding of how incremental is the channel compared to other investments that we were making in other media channels. And then that kind of led us down the path of, well, okay, now we have a high level understanding. What are the different ways or approaches we can continue to test to get maybe a little bit more granular understanding of what's going on with PMax, and ultimately how incremental is it to the business that we're running today. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been the last year plus has been chock full of tests and opportunities to learn and ultimately value correctly what PMax is doing for us.
Great. Thanks, Luke, for that background. All right, so now we're going to start moving into some data. We're first going to start this section with some insights into the measured brand portfolio, so all of our brands, and how they've been investing in PMax and where they've been funding it from. All right, Jim, do you want to give us kind of the top line here for what we saw across the measured portfolio brands? Oh, Jim, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Clay. The numbers you see here are essentially of the same type that we asked you in the first poll question. I saw a little bit higher percentage in the 0 to 25% bucket. That bucket I interpreted as there's probably a little bit of dabbling and dipping your toe in the water. What you see here is that in the second half of last year, about 60% of our clients, and we're talking about a client set of over 100 measured clients, invested in PMax in the second half. That was up from 45% of our clients in first half of 22. So adoption is still in progress. What I found most interesting about the distribution of allocations is I would have expected this bar to probably start high in the lowest bucket and decline down to the highest bucket. But you see that second bucket is higher than the first, and it's a little bit of a bump pattern, which tells me that advertisers in our portfolio are really leaning in. 40, 50, 60, even 70% of their total Google spend is going to PMax. And that makes understanding this campaign very important because there's a lot of media budget going behind it. Great.
Thanks, Jim. So now let's take a look at of those buckets of PMax allocation of total Google spend. Where did they tend to fund that from? And specifically here from the smart shopping and other shopping channels of Google, because that was kind of the seeming replacement for it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the first question I asked myself when I saw the heavy investment trend is, okay, where are they funding this from? Is it incremental? Are they sourcing it from various other places across their Google channel spend? And the trend we saw over those 100+ clients that we looked at, smart shopping was the #1 transition. That's not a surprise because smart shopping was being sunset and advertisers had no choice. What you're seeing on the chart to your left is essentially the median point change, the point being the share change associated with smart shopping and with non-branded shopping. So 18% of someone's Google budget borrowed from smart shopping to PMax. That's the median, right? And you can see that by groups of cohorts in terms of how much they've spent on PMax in the second half. The more surprising thing for me and the clear trend is our advertisers that work with us essentially think of PMax as, okay, I'm going to evolve my shopping spend and move it over there. But what you saw on the earlier slide is PMax is full funnel media. So now shopping, media dedicated to shopping is now being spread out throughout the Google ecosystem. And especially in those high share of budget categories, that can have implications on the performance, because now in just one tactics performance, you're now getting more of a portfolio similar to a mutual fund. And you'll see later in this webinar that has implications for how the campaign type is performing.
Great, thanks, Jim. And interestingly, that trend seemed to increase as brands spent more of their Google budget on PMax, tending to pull more and more of it from those shopping categories, which is also interesting. Luke, can you tell us a little bit about how RealTruck thought about funding PMax, and did that change at all over time throughout your learnings?
Yeah, I think, the key learning for us was, again, coming back to really having an understanding of the incrementality of the channel. Because certainly if you're in smart shopping, to Jim's point, there's a little bit of a trade going on between smart shopping to PMax. And really, I mean, this applies to all the various channels we're in, but certainly applies to PMax in that as we got better understanding of the true incrementality of the channel, then that allowed us to either dial up spend, dial down spend, change our ROAS targets, et cetera, and really fine tune our investment levels, across all of our various channels. And certainly that was the case with PMax. Again, just becoming more confident in either how much or how little, depending on the test and depending on what we found, we could invest in the channel and the strategy. Really, it's been a lot of fine tuning throughout the year as we've learned more, gotten more insights, and then making, maybe course corrections or adjustments throughout.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke. That's great insight. And I think you highlighted something interesting there, which is that it really is different for every brand, and the way PMax may distribute the funds across those channels may be different for every brand. And then, of course, where you're funding it from is going to be different for every brand. So long story short, it has to kind of be tailored to your particular brand strategy. Great. Thank you. We're going to do one more poll question. If you still got your Slido up, and the code's right there, if you haven't joined yet and want to participate in this poll, how did your brand, if you were investing in PMax, primarily fund PMax? Was it typically coming from smart shopping? Was it coming from other Google channels? Were you bringing in net new budget to fund it? Let's see what the results are here. And I guess a little bit as expected, Jim, does this surprise you at all to see most of it coming from smart shopping?
Smart shopping, not surprising at all because of the sunset and forced transition. Obviously, what we saw in our clients, I looked at major share changes. So while it could have been a little bit of dabbling, the biggest buckets were smart shopping and non-branded shopping.
Great. Thanks, Jim. All right, so let's jump ahead into some more data. And, oh, there it goes. Sorry, guys, just clicked ahead a little bit. Okay, PMax performance. So before we get into the incrementality values for PMax that we revealed for our clients in our portfolio, I wanted to give a quick recap on why incrementality for those who may be new to the concept or new to measured. On the right, you'll see a chart. This is a month's worth of incremental percentages for particular channels and tactics within our media portfolio. In this example, we are using incrementality to highlight the percentage of platform reported conversions that actually contributed to sales. So if we're looking at the Facebook prospecting example, let's say Facebook is reporting 100 conversions. Our incrementality model will call that a 66% incrementality, meaning 66 of those conversions reported by Facebook are actually contributing to business sales or are actually incremental. Now, it's important to remember that the incrementality percentage is not good or bad. It is a reflection of that platform's ability to accurately measure conversions. Additionally, important to note that this data is an aggregate across our entire brand portfolio, but each incremental value is uniquely modeled for every brand. And lastly, just a reminder that The core fuel for this model comes from all of the incremental lift tests that Measured is executing, which we've been increasing over the last 6 months with all of the PMax tests that we've been running. So that is what is informing the data that you guys are going to see in the next couple slides. Okay, so here we have the median incrementality percentages of all of the Google tactics with PMax right there in the middle. Jim, do you want to walk us through this slide and what we learned from this data?
Sure. So for all 100 clients that were a part of our analysis, we have uniquely modeled incrementality values for them, which is powered by our lift testing that Clay had mentioned. What you are seeing for each bar is the median value of all the ranges for those clients. So for broad interpretation purposes, I've sorted those to give everyone a flavor for what Google tactics on average tend to be more incremental and which ones tend to be less incremental. Now, with our clients, the tactics, the vast majority of the time are a combination of channel and funnel position. So you can see, retargeting or branded search or branded shopping be more lower funnel, and you can see those tend to have lower incrementalities versus prospecting or acquisition-oriented campaigns or non-branded keyword search and shopping, tend to have higher incrementality on average. What you'll see in the colored bars, PMax's green falls somewhat in the middle. That actually is not surprising, given that PMax is serving across all inventory based on the configuration settings and the audience that advertisers upload. It can serve retargeting media, Google branded search media, as well as YouTube upper funnel media or non-branded keyword media. So the fact that the median falls in the middle is not surprising at all. Now, smart shopping was similar. Smart shopping and non-branded shopping, they're colored in the rows. Those are the two where we saw the most funding for PMax come from. So smart shopping, you can see it was probably somewhat of an even trade, but we even saw in smart shopping that ranges can vary based on the brand specific footprint. For those that funded from non-branded shopping or maybe even non-branded search, what you can see is this results in a net trade-off downward on average on how incremental that media is likely to be. That's because, and I'll use a metaphor to describe this, many of you in running these tactics individually were doing the equivalent of investing in specific stocks that you think would provide specific returns. PMax is more of a mutual fund, and you're letting the fund choose which stocks to invest in. That may or may not work in your favor. In the case of the rose colored for non-branded shopping, given that a large number of advertisers funded it that way, it's going to be on average a net negative trade-off.
Thanks, Jim. That's really interesting. And I think this highlights, again, when we titled the webinar, Can You Beat the PMax Algorithm? It's really about, can you use incrementality to understand the value of each of your individual Google channels so that when you decide to invest in Performance Max, because at the end of the day, it is a convenient way to get access to all that Google inventory, are you funding it from the right places and using that information to make sure it's working for your business? Luke, I'm going to turn it over to you with a quick question. Without sharing anything too confidential, can you tell us a little bit about some of the broader PMax insights that RealTruck found throughout the testing process? And specifically, are there any unique characteristics of your brand that may have influenced the way PMax performed for you guys?
Yeah, I think what's very interesting to me, and certainly as we've had conversations preparing up to this webinar and seeing this slide, if you looked at our data and you ranked them kind of similarly how Jim has ranked them, I don't know if there's a channel that would be in the same position for us. and what that speaks to is that kind of uniqueness, right? That consumer experience and shopping journey that is going to be different for us than a lot of people on the webinar, and everyone's going to have their unique flavor here. And because of that, incrementality is likely going to be different. What we've been able to find, again, the challenge was how do we gain an understanding, whether it's an existing channel, whether it's a new channel, new strategy, how do we gain an understanding of what is truly incremental to what we would normally have gotten anyways? And, I think, again, what's been really interesting to see over the last year and running a number of geotests is that, we have some channels and strategies that are on this list where we might not invest in them anymore because it was found to be very not incremental to our business. And the flip side is also true, right? Where maybe we're more incremental than what's showing here. So I think it's been a really interesting journey. And, unfortunately, there's probably not a simple answer, right? There's not a simple answer where, hey, this is the number and it applies to everybody. It's always going to be a little bit unique for each company and advertiser.
Great. Thanks, Luke. That's great insight there. All right, let's jump on ahead to some more data across the measured portfolio of brands. So Jim, what happened over the last year to 6 months as measured brands ticked up spend into PMax?
Yeah, we decided to take a snapshot of first half versus second half of 2022, broadly aligned to the point of that's when smart shopping was sunset and forced adoption for PMax for those that had not yet invested in it was required. And what we saw, right, in the process is we looked at not only total PMax performance, and what you're seeing here is the percentage of advertisers that improved versus their performance worsened on the metric of cost per conversion, but adjusted for their incrementality value that we have modeled for them or they have used if they've done geo-testing. And we also looked at this for the total Google portfolio, because if 50 or 60 or 70% is going to PMax, is it influencing the performance of the entire channel spend? And so what you can see here, and what I'll point out in this trend, is the performance max, the percentage of advertisers or the number of advertisers where performance improved versus worsened. You can see those numbers for PMax are lower than for the total Google channel level, which is a clear indication that PMax is creating a drag on the overall channel performance. Now, many of them are trying this out. Many advertisers who may be on this call might still be experimenting and trying to figure it out. There are different configuration settings, different campaign types. You certainly heard Luke talk about his experience about trying to go through that journey as they were early adopters in the beta program. So this just may be a part of that learning process. But what we also believe we see in here is the dynamics of how incremental media, the incrementality of those specific media decisions that the algorithms are making are also creating that drag. Because by going full funnel, there's going to be serving down funnel into more or less incremental tactics, which will then drag down overall performance. And if you spend a lot, that's going to amplify that impact.
Thanks, Jim. That's great insight here into the performance overall. And I think it really speaks to that need for brands to understand how they're funding PMax and where it's coming from and how incrementality will be affected as you kind of shift money and spend into that channel. Thank you. All right. So now we're actually going to dive into some of the core source data that goes into our incrementality model. These are the 50, 60 plus tests that we've executed with brands in recent months on PMax. Now, I just want to give a quick pause and a reminder, we are going to have a Q&A session towards the end of this webinar. If you go back to your Slido, slido.com and enter the code, you can actually upvote on other questions that people are asking, and that can help bring them to the top so that we can get them answered for you. All right. Now, just in case anybody is not familiar with how an incremental lift test works, our data science model will identify the optimal test markets. In this example, it's states to run the media holdout. These are states with a high correlation to national sales, so that any impact we reveal in that state has a very, very high likelihood of being relevant to your national performance. The media is then held out for channels that are API enabled. We will automatically execute this holdout across those different states. And then what we will do is, let's say in this example, we're withholding PMax from Louisiana, for example. We will then look at the brand's e-commerce data, for example, from Shopify, and witness the drop in sales that actually occurred in that region. And the difference between the predicted sales and the actual sales reveals the number of sales that would have been caused by the media or the incremental lift. All right, so let's get into the data a little bit. Jim, what did we find across this variety of PMax tests?
So similar to the incrementality that you saw a couple of slides ago, these tests are the fuel that allow us to model the range of values for a particular advertiser on a particular tactic. I mentioned that you saw that PMax fell in the middle, probably because it served media everywhere. And our geo-testing is showing a very similar effect. The results we see range the entire spectrum. You can see the largest bucket of tests are showing that Performance Max is coming back with an incremental lift of 25% or less. So what that means is for every 100 conversions you see that AdWords reports, if your incrementality is 25%, then really 25% of those are only the ones that are truly making an impact due to the ad being seen. Others would have happened anyway. Same thing if you're on the high end at 75, 80, 90%. The important thing here to notice is that there are levers, there's experimentation, and that's going to generate a broader dispersion of results. Where PMax ultimately lands, we believe, is going to be very brand and execution specific. And that is exactly why we uniquely model every brand's individual incrementality using these test results, is because we know there are drivers underneath in how you execute the campaigns or the nature of your business and the categories you compete in. And to understand what those optimal settings would be for your brand, testing becomes paramount. There's the phrase that failing fast helps you to succeed sooner. I think that is very, very relevant here.
Great. Thanks, Jim. That's really insightful. So now we're going to move into our takeaway section and summarize some of the findings from the data. So first, we wanted to talk about this concept of how brands can tune performance using what we know to be true now about the different, what we're calling knobs or levers within PMax. Jim, do you want to give us a quick overview of these? And then Luke, maybe we'll turn it over to you after to talk about if any of these have been particularly useful for RealTruck.
Yeah, I saw a couple questions in the Q&A pop through on some of these knobs that are adjustable. You know, the geo-testing results now, that consisted of 55 tests, which is a lot in a very short period of time. I'm guessing we're going to get a lot more of those. And what we intend to do and what we aim to do is to understand what executional knobs and settings can actually drive the performance that the advertiser wants to see. You can see the four most common ones that are applied are, Google's providing now the opportunity to exclude branded keywords so that you can regulate how much PMax media is actually being served to branded search placements. That's generally going to have a positive impact on your incrementality because branded search typically indicates intent that someone would purchase irrespective of whether they clicked on that link or not. The nature of the target audiences that you upload can have a positive impact. If you're uploading customers and you are serving, maybe it's less incremental, but maybe you want to use PMax to reinforce retention and share protection from competitors. That's fine. That's a setting you have available to you. But realizing it might be less incremental. You can optimize to new customer acquisition based on what Google observes to be a new versus previously existing customer. And then frankly, we also have a strong belief that how aggressive or relaxed your targets are, your performance requirements, if they're really aggressive, you could be telling the Google algorithms to go chase the lowest hanging fruit, which also tends to be less incremental. So these knobs will be advertiser specific. And through our testing and our modeling, as we acquire more tests, our aim is to be able to say, if you want a certain level of incrementality, here's some of the optimization settings that we might provide to you to consider testing. It all depends on your intent, and you'll see that in the takeaways in a minute.
Thanks, Jim. Luke, any commentary here on specific knobs, and if not, or if there's anything else, if there's another direction we can go in here as well. It's, one question we get very frequently from brands is, I might not be ready to test consistently, on these channels. I may not quite have the volume necessary in order to do that. So maybe in relation to the insights you found and how you can tune the levers of PMax, maybe you can tie in a little bit about your experience with testing and making that investment, and how RealTruck kind of thinks about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've probably dabbled in each of these areas to some extent. One thing about our business, we have over 1 million products on our website. One way that we're a little unique is that we own and manufacture a number of brands that we sell, but then we also have, kind of normal e-com third-party relationships as well to really sell a wide variety of products. And that lends itself to having very different maybe targets that we want to hit for certain products, product categories, brands, et cetera. And so the last knob is probably one we've spent certainly a fair share amount of time in. How do we adjust, right? I think to Jim's point, some of the interesting behaviors we've seen is as we've gotten maybe more granular in adjusting a certain knob, and we think, oh yes, this will for sure lead to a more incremental outcome. Sometimes that's not the case. And so, I think the testing and learn mentality and approach has just become so central to what we're doing in our media investment strategy. And really, it all comes back to that incremental behavior, that incremental value, and ensuring that we are investing in the channels and the strategies that are going to drive the most incremental shopping behavior to our site. And I think each of these knobs, as you adjust, can have an impact on that. Certainly, we've seen that, particularly with the last knob, in adjusting and running, some fairly granular tests to ultimately get insights into both granular as well as broad insights into how ultimately PMax is benefiting or not benefiting our business.
Thanks, Luke. That's really interesting. And just kind of to go back to one of the previous slides that showed the incrementality of Google channels across the Google portfolio, we tend to find that lower funnel channels tend to be less incremental. So while platform reporting tends to show them as a higher ROAS, it's really more of a let me hit the target scenario, where those are consumers who were more likely to purchase anyway. So they end up actually being less net incremental to the business. And I think that fourth knob there is a really great example of how that can happen. You can increase your ROAS targets within PMax, and then it will shift that money into lower funnel channels that tend to have a higher platform ROAS, but ultimately end up being less incremental to the business. So I think that's a really, really great insight there. And that's why it's important to kind of play with the knobs and not necessarily just assume that one is going to do something for you, like you said there. So that's great. Thank you. All right. So here is our detailed takeaway chart for things that we've learned today and what we've uncovered through our testing and modeling of PMax with our portfolio of brands over the last 6 months. Jim, do you want to give us the summary here?
Sure. We saw through the budget shifting behaviors that there was a clear migration from shopping media budgets into Performance Max. My understanding of that is Performance Max is full funnel. It's like a DSP for the Google ecosystem. And there can be inherent trade-offs in doing that. The lesson from that is advertisers should choose what role they want Performance Max to play, and then tune it and fund it in a way so that you don't overinvest or underinvest across the channels and tactics on how you like to divide them between branded and non-branded and prospecting, acquisition media, and retargeting and so forth. If you don't do that, coming to the second learning, Performance Max will often serve media to less incremental inventory. That's not a value judgment. That's simply a statement of reflective of where do you want it to serve based on where you're spending in other dedicated Google campaign types, right, on an ongoing basis. And so making PMax fit within your overall Google channel allocation so that the investments are performing as you want them to and where you want them to be directed is what we would highly encourage you to do. If you don't do this, that lower funnel or less incremental media can drag down your overall channel performance, at least based on what we see when we adjust all of our clients' Google spend for their true incremental contribution. The theme here is incrementality matters. It is a variable that Google on its own has a hard time seeing. I would argue they don't see it. There could be other signals which suggest maybe funnel position, that this is going to be more or less than that. And what we tell our clients, like if you have a certain role and setting and you want to experiment, you have the opportunity to test it. RealTruck and Luke's teams have done that very successfully. And as we get more of those and start to think about some of those tuned knob settings, our full aim is to bring those back to our clients so that they can leverage this new campaign type more effectively.
Thanks, Jim. So a lot of good insights here. Thank you for summarizing that for us. All right, we are going to jump ahead to the Q&A section. If you've not joined Slido yet, you can participate in Q&A. Looks like we have quite a bit of time to hopefully get through some of those good questions. Alex Lawrence, also on our decision science team, is on the call, and he is going to help us walk through the Q&A. Alex, do you want to start bringing some questions up?
Yeah, thanks, Clay. There's been a lot of great questions. I've tried to answer them as we've gone through this. First question, I think I'll just throw out to the whole group, or Jim, if you want to take this. Any recommendations on how to implement geo-testing on PMax? Things like putting campaigns back into learning, or the interactions between PMax and other Google tactics. What should we be aware of as we're thinking about testing PMax specifically?
Yeah, there are certain, and we're getting into some of the nuts and bolts of geo-testing, and I know that there are a number of attendees on the call who are not familiar with it. So I'm going to try and answer your question, but keep it somewhat high level. We have seen in isolated tests that sometimes the learning period for PMax can take a while. It requires you to upload a lot of creative assets. The algorithms have to work for a while. The ideal testing scenario is that you will have run it with your desired configuration settings for a while and exit that learning phase before you actually test it. Some clients have been very eager to test it out of the gate. It can work. Sometimes the learning period is not an accurate reflection of its performance. So my recommendation, as we start to really get dialed in and more familiar with how the algorithms are operating, is that try to hit that runway first and then test. It might require a little patience, I get that, but it's gonna give a cleaner read on the test.
Great.
Yeah, just to maybe echo your point, Jim, that was definitely our approach, right? I think if you're starting to do incrementality testing while you're still in learning mode, you could get some pretty interesting outcomes from that that may not reflect reality. Versus if you've got at least fairly stable investments and out of learning mode, then you're in a better position to do some incrementality testing and get the learnings you're looking for.
Thanks, Luke. Good add.
Next question here, Jim. You mentioned some best practices around excluding branded keywords, optimizing to new customers, et cetera. I've had a lot of questions about how have these things impacted test results? Does running a larger share of budget on PMax for Google overall impact results? Things like setting higher, lower ROAS targets, is that affecting results? Any commentary you can add on what we've seen about these different levers you can pull?
So we attempted to analyze some of those dynamics for this webinar. And what we ran into is there are lots of levers. And just because you look at with lever X and sort the tests that way, there are other levers that can also come into the equation. So it is a multi-dimensional puzzle, which 55 tests we think we are seeing, and we have a sense of what we believe is happening. But the data isn't unquestioningly conclusive as to what makes a difference and how much. But what you saw on the knob slide, the 2 pluses for the branded keywords and the new customer acquisition, based on everything we know about incrementality, we are strongly confident that that's true. Now, how that interacts with what types of target audiences or target settings and when it may not be true when you have those 2 knobs set up, like that's the noise that we will be continuing to unpack. But some of these things can work in both directions, and that's why you see the plus minus depending on the behavior.
Yeah, maybe I'll just share a quick experience. After we got our initial baseline reading of PMax, kind of a broad measurement, right, to understand that incrementality, we started to get into maybe some of these more granular tests where we're twisting certain knobs, making some certain adjustments, and the difference in performance on some of those tests was frankly shocking to me. And so it can have a very dramatic impact. And honestly, it made us go back and test maybe the baseline again to make sure, we didn't just catch some random stretch of time where things were maybe more or less incremental. So I think that was another key learning for us over the year, has been maybe revisiting some of those tests, getting more data points to confirm what we're seeing, because there are a lot of market dynamics right now that can shift and adjust and change, and that was I'd say a key learning for us within this year of testing.
Great. Another really interesting question here is, given that PMax is really full funnel, right? It's upper, mid, lower funnel, everything together. How should you think about comparing the results versus either upper or lower funnel tactics that you're also running? And I think, Jim, can you just speak to maybe how incrementality normalizes for that performance across the funnel?
Yes. So from a consumer perspective, incrementality is really based on the notion of pre-existing buyer intent. If I'm doing a branded search, I already know the brand exists. I am consciously searching for them for a reason. I might just click to them as a navigational technique to get to the site, go shopping, and buy something. I was intending on buying anyway. It doesn't necessarily mean that ad caused the sale. Lower funnel media, where there's pre-existing intent, that's the key expression. Site visitors, there's pre-existing intent. Branded keyword terms, there's pre-existing intent. Advertising to existing customers, there is some degree of pre-existing intent of people who are in market and would have purchased anyway. That is the number one thing that will drive this. And so acquisition media will inherently be more incremental because you're essentially going out to find people who you don't know you exist yet. Maybe they know they have certain interests that you want to dial into that audience. Their conversion rates may be lower, but the actual conversions that do happen will be more incremental. So the fundamental dynamic is you could have a very strongly performing lower funnel tactic, even if it is not very incremental, because the conversion rates are sky high. Incrementality just normalizes that so that you can truly evaluate it based on its actual contribution.
Thanks,
Great.
Jim.
One other question here is, there's some concerns from some of the attendees here that PMax is taking away brand search or just very lower funnel inventory. I think you've spoken about it a little bit, Jim, but any other comments you'd like to add about what we've seen about maybe the less incremental or low-hanging fruit that PMax is grabbing?
Yeah, so brand, and I would be very interested in Luke's perspective on this as well. The brand search exclusion, like most everyone who's been doing this for a while knows that as consumers, a lot of branded search is not very incremental because it's just being used as a navigational technique to get to the site. And they just click on the ad in order to achieve the purpose that they already would have done anyway. That said, some branded search can actually have a decent level of incrementality if there's a lot of competition for branded search terms. If I'm Coke, I might bid on Pepsi terms and vice versa in order to try and steal some of that share. Depending on some of those dynamics, what we would counsel advertisers to do is you have a certain amount that you believe should be invested in branded search. How you allocate that volume between your PMax spend and your dedicated branded search spend, like it was easy before PMax existed. You just dialed up and down your branded search spend as you felt was appropriate. PMax has been added, and now you have to try and between the two, make sure that you don't overinvest or underinvest in it. Google's made it a little more complicated. That's probably why they're allowing the brand search exclusions. So as you think about what's the role of that media, just think about, I have two things now to manage instead of one.
Yeah, I'd say, for us, without getting into the kind of granular tactics, again, it just comes back to that incrementality. We've been able to see what the incrementality is on our Google brand spend. To Jim's point, we've been able to see incrementality on our PMax efforts. Those two numbers are very different. And as we continue to test and learn and optimize to that incrementality, we're ultimately getting to a more optimized state and really driving the level of investment and return that we're looking for. I will say the other thing, and this was done by people, just search marketers in general. If you do some digging, there are roundabout ways to figure out a little bit more about the black box and to see actually what type of inventory you're accessing. I think the incrementality plus being able to get some of those insights out of the black box, have really helped guide and shape our media investment approach.
Thanks, Luke.
Great.
I think we have time for probably 2 or 3 more.
Yeah, sounds good. Luke, a question for you actually on maybe some of the differences you may have seen across product categories. I know you've tested different product categories. There was a question about variation in incrementality related to creatives or industry or products. Without sharing anything, confidential, I'm curious what you found on things like product categories.
Yeah, I think I alluded to it in one of my earlier comments where our first incrementality test on PMax was just to kind of get a baseline, and it was across the board. From there, that lended itself to, okay, now we need to start tuning the knobs, right? We need to start playing around with things to see how it impacts. Do we have different incrementality? And can definitely tell you that there's a wide variety of results that you'll get depending on how you test. Through measured, you have holdout tests, you have scale up tests. In our experience, that tends to paint a different picture. If you want to scale up, test scaling up a tactic as opposed to just understanding what does current incrementality look like. in addition to maybe all those other levers that you can pull. So yeah, I can say we absolutely saw you know, a variety, let's put it that way, of different incrementality percentages, and that led itself to more testing, right? To understand, okay, that's how it was under these circumstances. What happens if maybe we change a few things here or there? Then what happens? And it has really been, I guess, that approach, that continual learning and testing approach, has really just given us a lot of confidence in how we are allocating our spend, and you know, ensuring that we're driving that incrementality behavior that we're looking for.
Great. Thanks so much for that. I think last question, you know, I think this is probably more of a question for your agency partners. I'm getting a lot of questions about, does it make sense to optimize PMax to only give it assets so it games it to serving more shopping placements? Is PMax good or bad, or how can we ensure shopping still serves? Jim, I don't know if you have any comments generally on what we found, or if you would also just defer to the campaign experts on that. But I've gotten several versions of that question.
My broad response to that question, and it's a very good one, is the testing mentality, like, we would highly encourage. The missing piece here is visibility into placement reporting, right? If you knew, like, you could do these tests, but you don't know if the media is ending up in where you want it to end up. Luke alluded to the fact that there, you know, if you go on to Reddit or other forums, there might be back-end ways to hack into where some of that is happening. Really, I know that there has been a drumbeat. I've heard from many of our clients that they're really trying to push Google into providing more visibility into that. Ultimately, I think that will be what allows the full benefits of automation to be realized. I don't necessarily object to their algorithms are deciding. Where I would push them is just let us know so that we can figure out what works best for us.
Yeah, Alex, maybe I'll just chime in a little bit with our experience. You know, certainly we've had that concern and that worry, right? You know, again, I think where we've been able to gain some of those insights to one, maybe alleviate some of those fears. Really for us, what we've seen is not necessarily the assets are driving the allocation. It's much more the spend and the ROAS targets, because Google's going to somewhat prioritize the investment based on those two factors. And so if you have really aggressive ROAS targets and a ton of spend, you're probably going to be showing up in like YouTube more, right? Because they just don't have, if they don't have enough inventory in the other channels and strategies to be able to, you know, spend your funds. So, you know, we're one organization. I'm sure it's going to be different across the board, but I would say that the targets and the budget have been more impactful on Google's decisions on where to serve.
Great. That's really great insight. Thank you guys so much. We are at the top of the hour, and I would like to be conscious of time for all of our participants. Thank you so much for joining our session today. There were a lot of great questions in the Slido and in the Zoom Q&A.
I will read every one of them. I'm very interested to see.
Yes, so as a follow-up to the session today, you will receive a recording of the webinar. Additionally, we will provide some additional answers to some of those questions that we were not able to get to. In the meantime, if you're a brand interested in learning more about incrementality, you can go to measure.com/demo and you can schedule a consultation with our team to learn more about how either incrementality testing or our incrementality model can help inform more of your media investment decisions. Thank you so much, Luke, for joining us today. Your insight is always welcome. Jim, thank you for your expertise, and Alex for handling our Q&A. Thank you again to everybody who joined, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the attendance.
Yeah, thanks.